Hi, my name is Matthew Baldwin, and thanks for joining this discussion today on innovation within the financial services industry. We've assembled a panel of industry experts who will share innovation trends and current use of emerging technologies. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get right into it by introducing our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce IMRAN HAIDER of Wells Fargo, Head of Open Banking. Welcome. Greg PAVLIK, Senior Vice President. Mark Rekmilovich, Senior Director, Blockchain. And Sanjay Matthew, Senior Director, Financial Services. And now to the first question. IMRAN, how is emerging tech being applied to Wells Fargo, and how is it changing the overall business model of a connected ecosystem at the bank?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for having me, Matt. Excited to be here. So on the innovation side, a couple of trends that are really relevant for us are really focused on customer experience. And when I think about customer experience, I think about distribution. So banking, you think about banking in the historical context. Distribution has been one of the drivers for success for banks really anywhere in the world, right? And then you start thinking about distribution, and you go back 40 years ago, you had a decent network of branches across the U.S., and customers were using those branches, consumers were. And then you had innovation. You had ATMs, and ATMs were created because there's a recognition that customers wanted to really leverage their bank, access their data, access cash, make transactions beyond the branch, right? So a whole network of ATMs was created, distribution was extended. Then 20 years later, we had the advent of digital banking, online banking, and the creation of essentially virtual branches, right? And over the last 20 years, we've seen just a ton of adoption, a lot of success in the space. We've got customers, many of our customers, I'd say most of our customers, across both wholesale, small business, consumer, their primary touch point with the bank is through digital channels. So then you come to the present and you recognize that you've got online banking through a PC, you've got mobile banking, so you can take your bank anywhere and you can access the bank. But there's an opportunity like there was 40 years ago with the extension of ATMs, the creation of ATMs and the extension of distribution. This idea that banking is really, banking, sometimes we think of banking as a destination, but banking is really one step in a much broader workflow for the customer. So if we can get banking to the customer in the context that's relevant for them, then we're adding value for the customer. So we've begun, over the last couple of years, using APIs and bringing the bank to the customer in experiences that are relevant for them. We're also using technologies like AI to improve guidance and advice for the customer, and focusing on payments and payment speed and how to really, facilitate and simplify the customer's lives. So those are a couple of major trends that we're very excited about, we're investing in, and really making some great progress.
So you're seeing this enhancement of the customer experience, a trend over time of enhancing the customer experience so that they can interact with the bank much more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things there. Outside of distribution and bringing the bank to the customer so that we fit the bank in their workflow, right? So, think of so I've got a daughter. She's going to go to college in a couple of years, but she's ready to buy a vehicle, right? So we're thinking about what we should buy her as a car. It's going to be a used car because ultimately, we don't want dents and dings and scratches on the new vehicle. So we're looking for a used car, and I'm going to various sites and looking for the right vehicle. It shouldn't be too large because we don't want her to have trouble maneuvering the vehicle. It needs to be the right price point. But then the bank is sort of disconnected from that experience, right? So figuring out how much I can afford, whether I should finance, how much of a down payment I'm going to make is disconnected. So bringing the bank to that experience would be very valuable using APIs. And then I think you were asking about sort of guidance and advice. The other opportunity we have is we've got a lot of data at a bank of our size. We've really focused on a couple of initiatives to take that data, simplify it, normalize it, structure it in a manner that we can use it for guidance. And once you've got that structure and you've got something like a data lake created, then you can add a layer of AI and begin to personalize and provide really recommendations that are actionable and insights that are meaningful for customers. So that's the goal. That's the path.
That's great. Thank you for that answer. Now, Greg, I know that you have some insight into this particular area and how you're going to think about this. From your interactions with other banks and other customers, how do you see customers handling this volume of data that's coming at them and making great decisions?
So the banks need to manage larger and larger data sets to make better and better decisions. So you talk about this AI layer on top of the data. You first start out with a data lake, and then you start to figure out how do you actually take advantage of these data sets effectively. And we're seeing it being applied across a range of decisions. So some of these are efficiency driven, right? How do I get to better outcomes for how I run the internals of the bank? And some of them are more effective. How do I make better results or get more personalized content into the end user directly? More and more there's pressure to have this happen in real time within the transaction stream, so exactly what you noted. Mm-hmm. While I'm pursuing a business transaction or purchasing the car, can I get underwritten or can I get a loan approved in the fly effectively with better and better decisions being made in real time? Those are all key drivers for what we're seeing with artificial intelligence. And what the artificial intelligence allows the bank to do is to lower the cost of the transaction overall, because it's making better decisions and they're making those decisions in an automated fashion rather than having to rely on more and more humans in the process.
That's great insight. Now, Sanjay, you've been working with payments and open banking as well. How are you pulling these together so that you may have different technologies, different capability across the workflow of the bank? How are you pulling these together, and how are you working with Wells Fargo? I mean, how are you pulling these together? Sure. in this area?
So I think I second what Imran said. This is all about customer experience, whether it is corporate or consumer. Better onboarding, better payment experience, better reconciliation, better transparency. And we're starting to see the industry lines sort of morph together. They're all collapsing between telcos, between retail, between real estate. This whole notion of ubiquitous banking, which is invisible banking. You don't need a branch. You need to be omnipresent. And what we're trying to see is basically the evolution of open banking, which is more of a regulatory idea, but now more of the it to be an actual business model where you can go into two paradigms. One is banking as a service, where you can expose your payments, your KYC capabilities, and have it embedded anywhere, and then even charge for it. Meaning, I don't need to basically monetize it with my own customer. Somebody else could basically take that and embed it. There's that idea, and that to that end, we're working with sort of collapsing lines where we at Oracle have partnerships, or we have a customer base in a variety of industries in our ERP portfolio. We've got telco customers, we've got retail customers, we've got oil and gas customers. These guys all need financial services capabilities and payment capabilities. So we're helping the banks morphing these capabilities, bringing our own integration technologies, enabling their APIs that they have. So the bank exposes their APIs, and we're basically embedding that service. So which means that in the future, if you were within one of our applications and you need to connect to a bank, I don't need to log on. If I need to reconcile my balances, I can stay right within my ERP experience. And this goes into also the way our applications have been written to be open and extendable. Meaning, if you create a closed application, you can add on the experience. So now we can literally embed the banking experience, like direct payments, direct reconciliation, all those things directly within ERP, which is amazing. So this is how we're helping them build the ecosystem. And then on top of that, basically, there's this whole new paradigm called banking as a platform, which is this is more inspired from Asia, where we're seeing some of the bigger banks taking leaps into creating this ecosystem of providing holistic services. So for example, car buying experience, going to the movies, getting recommendations for other things, all coming into one app. And what banks are trying to do is basically, this is an ability for them to understand more about the customer so that they can provide that real-time recommendation right in there. So how do you do that, right? You can do that if you knew what you did yesterday. And he's not doing everything. Is not in banking. He went to a movie. He went to a restaurant. How do you capture all that data? Right? So the banks are now starting to create that ecosystem, and then that's where you can apply AI, machine learning, and then basically embed that back into the channel. So there's this whole notion of conversational AI that's coming in, which is completely the idea of, hey, I'm talking to you, not only just corporate or consumer, it's all about not only just giving me recommendations, not only give me insights, but actually make those actions, right? The next level is autonomous, which is autonomous banking, which is, I trust your recommendations, I'm going to make an overdraft, I've got cash here, move that money for me on behalf, right? So I think that's the evolution that's going to start to come both in the consumer and corporate side. So it's phenomenal, usage of technology that's happening to transform banking.
Thank you. That's a great, awesome insight. Now, Mark, we were talking earlier about the virtual banking idea and how to bring in different parties into play into building this virtual bank, and you're actually seeing some capability, I would say, in emerging economies actually is one area, and also how multiple banks from multiple countries are actually working together. Can you give us on how blockchain can actually is supporting, is a fundamental data management kind of supporting capability underneath this from a reconciliation perspective, ledger? Can you give some insight there?
Data management and transactions as well, right? Some of the things that Sanjay and IMRAN were talking about, helping customer get a better experience on the front end, having the applications integrated with the bank services, also applies now to the back end of the bank services, right? I mean, the customer might initiate something from the application. It might be a, letter of credit kind of request, some documentary processing in trade finance. It could be a payment, cross-border payment. The execution of those processes on the back end requires banks to cooperate with other entities. And often what happens today, or what used to happen before banks started leveraging some of the capabilities around blockchain, it took a long time. There was lack of visibility, lack of transparency. Even in the best case, a cross-border payment involving correspondent banking networks and so on could take 2 or 3 days, and people wouldn't really have visibility as to where that would happen, where the monies are, etc. Today, with the blockchain, we're now beginning to see more and more banks adopting capabilities for real-time payments, where you have same-day use of funds availability. So just as you go into your application and you use an API, for example, to trigger something, you could immediately see the result of that payment happening on the other end of the world somewhere through the use of blockchain, the trusted transactions that blockchain enables. We actually have a customer that recently went live, Arab Jordan Investment Bank, one of the largest private banks in the Middle East, with a number of branches all over Middle East and Europe, being able to provide same-day use of funds. You talked about kids going to school and needing to buy a car. They have, for example, situations where a kid might be studying in another country, right? And they don't want to necessarily plan ahead. When they need money, they call and say, Dad, Mom, can I have some money now? Right? They're not going to wait 2 or 3 days for an international transfer. So same-day use of funds applies whether it's a consumer or if it's a corporate payment, for example, right? And you need money right away because you need to move some funds around. There are some opportunities you want to take advantage of at an corporate level. That provides a great set of capabilities, and it in fact improves the customer experience as well, because customers now benefit immediately from this real-time connection from the applications and real-time execution of the processes. Similarly with trade finance, we're beginning to see a lot of movement of documentary processes that involve sometimes multiple organizations, corporates, banks, other companies, sometimes multiple banks, onto a blockchain environment. I was recently in Asia, and we've seen some announcement from Hong Kong Monetary Authority. He has a group of 12 banks in Hong Kong and other parts of Asia that are actually doing supply chain financing processes, purchase orders that are being placed on the blockchain, are being funded through the blockchain network, access to all of the data. And multiple banks on both sides of the transaction can actually see the same purchase order at the same time, and all of the updates that go in, usually multiple versions and so on. They can see the reconciliation that's happening, and then when the payment is triggered because goods have been delivered, invoices have been reconciled, etc., they can do that in real time as well.
Great, thank you. I think the virtualization of the bank and then not functionally having a bank in some like a physical place to go to and being able to execute the transactions, I think in payments is the wave of the future, obviously. Imran, just a quick question. One thing we're seeing across these discussion items is being able to move things faster. Mm-hmm. In your experience, are you seeing this? Are you seeing banking activities moving faster because of the open banking and the approach to this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the sort of drivers for open banking is the fact that you can connect and get data. It's real time, right? An API is real time. You connect to your bank, you get the balance, the real time balance, the balance that's like you would see in like online banking or commercial electronic office. I think customer expectations also based on their interactions with other companies and other industries. The expectation very much is that I'm going to make a payment, I'm going to move money, and the money will move immediately. It's electronic, right? It should move immediately. If I can go to a store and I can order an online store and I can order, laundry detergent and it shows up later today, why can I not move money today, right? Exactly. Why don't the funds move immediately? And so as an industry, we're very focused on delivering really on that concept, the idea that our customers want both on the consumer side as well as the business side. They want us to they want to be able to move funds immediately, and they also want better data. They want better methods of reconciliation. They want they want acknowledgement that the funds that they transferred were received by the other party. So I think there's a couple of facets there around payments, but we're all in as an industry, as a bank, on really solving this problem for our customers. And I think over the next couple of years, we'll see a lot of progress with real-time payments, with Zelle, and then ultimately with open banking and embedding payments in the workflows that are relevant to customers.
So because we're actually collecting a lot of data, and we're collecting a lot of data very quickly, Greg, how are we addressing kind of the data management capabilities that are needed to support these activities and amongst multiple pillars? Because then we're going to say this is a team sport, and how do we pull this together from a team sport perspective?
So I think you hit one of the key terms on the head, which is data management. Because underlying technologies are used to store the data. They may be relational databases, they may be data lakes, right? They may be a combination of all the above, but you have to be able to make sense of what's there, and you have to have access to that data in more and more timely fashions. It's no longer okay to look at, hey, I got a roll-up statement at the end of the month, I'm going to make a decision. I need to have accurate data that I can work with today, right? So you need to have a data governance veneer over top of the data assets so that when you think in terms of a data lake or when you think in terms of your data assets, you have a holistic view that's up to date, available in real time. And that's particularly important when you start to talk about then bringing in AI technologies, because that AI layer needs to work on data that's freshly available and up to date. When you build models with machine learning, those models in a sense are immediately becoming invalidated, because as time moves over and the data starts to shift and change, the assumptions that went into building the models change as well. So now you have to have that accurate data available all the time in real time, but you have to be able to refresh these models and validate these models over and over again against the data that's coming in. So it opens up a whole new domain of problems around model management, model accuracy, model freshness, so to speak.
So it's a governance problem.
There's a data governance problem
and a model governance problem.
And then there's a model governance problem. And two of the big areas where Oracle's focused on working with banks and with financial service institutions is data governance, part of the data management problem, and then how do we extend that into model management and guarantee that these models remain effective over time.
Which kind of plays into a blockchain saying this is the valid data here, this is the record data.
I think that's certainly part of it, right? Because you want to make sure that as you collect the data into data lakes, as part of the governance processes, you also have ways of validating the provenance of the data, right? That you can trust it.
Correct.
But I think there is also a factor here that is completely changing the perspective on data management. We used to think of data management within an enterprise, data management within a bank, for example, right? And all of the data that comes in would be your own data that you generate, plus whatever data you get from external sources. And that typically comes in through batch processes or Excel spreadsheets or what have you. People today are now looking to consolidate data from multiple silos, right? If you're working with multiple organizations, they all have their own data, they all have those silos. How do you actually get some shared data that's important to their decision making, the machine learning models and so on in one place, somewhere that you can actually trust it, make sure that it's all organized and reconciled in real time, right? So everybody has the same exact values of that data, but that it's available to be able to execute those models. One of the things we've been working on is making sure that as more data is collected in the blockchains, there is a way of synchronizing that into other means where you can actually execute those models, and you can do data management, data quality, governance, etc., in a standard sort of a data warehouse, data lake environment, relational databases, but synchronize that from a real-time perspective from blockchain transactions into those kind of stores that allow your AI and machine learning models to actually be effective.
Great, those are
I
great
just want to
insights.
add that on
Thank
the
you,
data
Sanjay.
side, yes, of course, you got to balance customer rights. If you look at GDPR and rules like that, they're right on the money in terms of what you do with the data. But having said that, we're seeing some of the most innovative banks starting to look at data as a business, where they're not selling data, but it's about looking at not only using for internal consumption to drive the customer experience, but we're starting to see marketplaces come out where banks could sell the insights from there, right? Like, I'm not telling you any information about you, Matt, but insights about that demographic, right? So we're starting to see some of the most advanced banks starting to leapfrog. There's those banks where we're starting to look at, hey, there's this pile of data. Let me try to, optimize my current customer experience. But there's also the other sector, which is starting to look at saying data as a business, and how they can push that data to drive somebody else's process as well and sell data as a service. I mean, we at Oracle has data as a service business. Now, banks, as they start to build banking as a platform, banking as a service, there's a new business model that's going to start evolving as well, where you're not basically making money on just your NIM. But this is non-interest income or technology income. Most banks today, if you go to any of the conferences, they would say, we're actually a technology company, we're not a bank anymore. And because they've started to realize there's so much data out there, and they're right in the middle of this epitome of all this data coming together and what they can do with it. So I think there's lots of cool innovation beyond the realms of the bank itself that they're trying to optimize, but to also start to look at how do I harvest it and then basically derive more value for myself and maybe some other partners as well. So that's really cool stuff that we're starting to see.
So on our side, we've actually decided not to do that. We feel that it's not a business we want to enter. But if you think about partnerships and you think about the opportunity of building ecosystems, that is absolutely there. So our approach is you have a consumer or a small business customer or even a wholesale customer, and they want to use their data in a different platform, then we've got this whole process using OAuth, where they can go to that, they can be on that site, they can see a Wells Fargo logo, they can come to our site, and then they can decide, I want to share, account 1, account 2, balance for this, but not balance for the other one. I want to share transaction history, and then we, connect the two accounts together, and that data flows per the customer's directions. And if they ever want to turn it off, they can come back to us and they can turn it off. We call that control tower, and got a good feedback from folks in the marketplace. So, but there is absolutely an opportunity to build ecosystems and connect the bank with other fintechs. Recognizing that no one company is going to solve all the financial services issues or opportunities.
I think kind of looking at you're going to require partners to be able to do this. The bank is not necessarily going to do everything on their own, and they're going to partner for particular activities and particular services that are going to service their business most effectively, I guess is a good point. So Sanjay, in terms of fintechs, I know you're working with them pretty closely, so insight into this whole ecosystem, what are they thinking about?
So we know over the last 5-7 years, there's been an explosion of fintech. There's been about $145 billion of VC capital, which has been spent in this industry, where these new innovators or startups are able to use modern technologies, pretty much the stuff that we talked about, AI, machine learning, data, APIs, and are much more nimble, and then create innovative offerings much faster. Historically, they were seen as competition, and they all thought that they would actually become the new bank. And we're starting to see, they run out of cash and things like that. They do need the banks themselves. So they've started to become enablers. And we've seen a whole ecosystem of fintechs which cover, things such as biometrics, payments, AI, cognitive, machine learning, reporting, very point functions, which by itself, they do a fantastic job. And then really, basically, the value is somebody who can aggregate this, meaning the idea is that I don't need to build all this monolithic bank, which I've built over the last 100 years, aggregated, core banking systems, building the front end and the back end. You could technically aggregate all of those things if you had a component-based architecture, which was built on an API idea. So we're starting to, we at Oracle, we pride ourselves in the technology that we produce, but we know the raft of technology that's coming in. And a lot of these fintechs actually use Oracle Cloud because we provide enterprise-grade technology. We're secure, we're faster. So they, in price performance perspective, they love those things. So we have a portfolio of fintechs, and as we build this banking ecosystem, we're taking to banks because banks take a, outside, let's say, I would say top 4 or 5, Citi, JP, who has the luxury of, harvesting and spending time with the fintechs. The others don't, right? So how do you basically provide curated fintechs? How do you provide the right basically somebody who's proven, somebody who knows regulatory compliance, the stuff scales, it doesn't crash and burn. So we're starting to see this whole top tier, cream of the crop fintechs that banks want, and banks are starting to build up, right? Because banks themselves realize that they're not going to build everything, right? Because talent is basically flying all over the place, and it's much more faster and nimble if you can integrate it. So we have harvested that, and then we see the future where you can see plug-and-play banking, which is that I can't hardwire any process. I need to be able to be nimble, where I can plug out, let's say, today's biometric with tomorrow's biometric, or today's KYC with tomorrow's KYC, and then create that architecture. So we have an ecosystem that we are harvesting, and then we're helping banks, digitize and transform faster. So if banks want to work with us on payments, we have, our core technology plus fintechs which leverage that, and we're helping them accelerate faster, leveraging the best of Oracle as well as best of what the external industry is providing.
Thank you. And gentlemen, thank you so much for sitting on this panel today. I think we can say very clearly that innovation is occurring very quickly inside the banking industry right now, that we're seeing not just a robust partnerships and marketplace, basically, when you think about it in terms of what's happening in the banking industry. But I want to say thank you very much for being here, for your insights and the opportunity to discuss with us and with the Oracle community about where things are going in financial services. Have a good day.